The vote passed before I even finished reading the resolution aloud. 11 hands raised, 1 held down, and just like that, 14,000 human vessels were given 60 days to vacate Council-protected space. I am Veth Soral, Senior Arbiter of the Galactic Council. I have served in this chamber for 41 years. I have mediated the Keth border disputes. I guided the Mirith accession. I wrote the language of the Civilizational Standards Act myself, word by careful word. And I want to tell you something that I have never said to anyone in this chamber, not once in 4 decades of service. I was wrong. Not in a small way. Not in the way a man is wrong about the weather or about which road to take home. I was wrong the way a builder is wrong when he tears out the foundation of a house because he does not like the color of the stone. I was wrong in a way that cannot be undone, only survived. And not everyone survived it. But I am getting ahead of myself. The day of the vote, the chamber was packed. Every delegation had sent their senior members. The Velhari contingent arrived in their ceremonial robes, which they only wear when they expect to win something. The Torvan delegates sat together in a tight cluster, speaking quietly among themselves, their pale eyes moving around the room like they were counting something. I noticed at the time that they seemed almost nervous. I told myself it was excitement. The human ambassador was already seated when I arrived. Her name was Commander Asha Reyes. She was a small woman with dark hair pulled back flat against her head, and she wore the gray uniform of the Terran Diplomatic Corps without a single decoration on it, which I had always found slightly strange. Every other delegation wore their honors. The Velhari stacked theirs so high the fabric could barely hold the weight. Asha Reyes wore nothing but her name and her rank. She was reading something on a small device when I took my seat. She did not look up. I will tell you what the resolution of civilizational standards said, because it matters. It said that member species of the Galactic Council were expected to conduct themselves in a manner consistent with the shared values of the galactic community. It listed those values: peaceful coexistence, proportional response, cooperative trade, cultural humility. What it did not say, but what everyone in that room understood, was that it was written about humans. The complaints had been building for years. Decades, really. The humans had a habit of doing things without being asked. Their patrol ships moved through sectors that were not technically assigned to them. Their diplomats said things in negotiation rooms that other species found blunt to the point of being offensive. Their colonies grew fast, their populations faster, and the speed of it made the older species uncomfortable in a way that was hard to articulate, but very easy to feel. The Velhari had submitted the formal complaint 18 months earlier. The council had debated it, studied it, formed committees around it, and ultimately produced the resolution that now sat in front of me, crisp and official, waiting to be made real. I read it aloud, all 14 paragraphs. My voice was steady. I was proud of my voice that day. When I finished, I called for the vote. 11 hands. I looked at Asha Reyes. She had not raised her hand, of course. She was the only human in the room with voting rights, and she had made clear in committee that humanity would oppose the resolution at every stage. But she did not argue now. She did not stand up and demand to be heard. She sat very still and watched the hands go up around her, and when I formally announced the result, she nodded. Just once, a single small movement of her head, like she was confirming something she had already known for a long time. Then she gathered her device, stood up, smoothed the front of her uniform, and walked out of the chamber. No speech. No statement to the press waiting outside. Nothing. The room exhaled around me. I felt it too, that release of tension, that sudden lightness that comes when something difficult is finally finished. The Velhari representative leaned over and said something appreciative to me that I no longer remember. The Torvan delegates began speaking more loudly now, their nervousness replaced with something that looked like satisfaction. I told myself the lightness I felt was relief. I did not yet understand that it was something else entirely. The 60-day withdrawal period passed quietly. That was the first strange thing. I had expected some pushback, some negotiation around the timeline, some request for exceptions. There were 14,000 human vessels operating in council space. Supply ships, patrol craft, medical transports, research stations, diplomatic couriers. 14,000 ships do not simply disappear in 60 days without logistical complications that require discussion. But there were no requests for extensions, no complications that reached my desk. The humans simply began to leave. I watched the departure tracking reports out of professional habit. Each day the number decreased. 14,000, became 11,000, became 8,000, became 4,000. The numbers dropped with a steadiness that I found, in retrospect, deeply unsettling. It was not the pace of an organization scrambling to comply. It was the pace of an organization that had already planned for this, that had, perhaps, been planning for it for some time. On the 58th day, the last human vessel logged its departure through the outer Keth waypoint. A small cargo transport called the Meridian. Nothing remarkable about it. It filed its exit paperwork, cleared the waypoint sensor array, and was gone. On day 61, I received the first distress signal from Sector 9. A convoy of Velhari trade ships had been boarded by raiders just beyond the Keth border markers. 3 ships taken, 1 destroyed. The Velhari delegation sent the report to my office with a note asking when council patrol vessels would be dispatched to investigate. I remember looking at the sector map on my wall display, the one I had looked at 1,000 times, and feeling a cold, strange confusion. Because the Keth border sectors had been human patrol jurisdiction for 60 years. 60 years of relative quiet, of raiders turned back before they reached trade lanes, of distress signals that almost never needed answering because the problems were handled before they became emergencies. It had never occurred to me, not once, to ask what would happen when that coverage stopped. I sent a dispatch to the Council Defense Coordination Office asking which member species had patrol vessels available for Sector 9 redeployment. The answer came back in 4 hours. None immediately available. The nearest Velhari patrol fleet was stationed 14 days away. The Torvan had no vessels in that quadrant. The other council members did not maintain significant patrol presence in that region because, for 60 years, they had not needed to. I approved an emergency redeployment order and marked the file as high priority. It was already too late for the 3 ships that had been taken. The crews were ransomed back over the following weeks at significant cost. It was an unpleasant situation, but manageable. An anomaly, I told myself. A one-time disruption in the transition period. I believed that for almost 3 weeks. Then the second distress signal came. Different sector, different raiders, same result. Then a third. I called a closed session of the senior council staff in the second month. Not a full council meeting, not yet. Just a small room, the people I trusted, a display showing the incident map that was beginning to look less like a map of isolated problems and more like a map of a system coming apart at the seams. This is a transitional disruption, the Velhari senior coordinator said. Her name was Prith Vale, and she had supported the resolution loudly and with great enthusiasm. She was not enthusiastic now. Once our patrol fleets are properly repositioned, the situation will stabilize. The repositioning will take 8 months minimum, said Councillor Darrow of the Torvan, a quiet man with a habit of saying very precise things very softly. We do not have 8 months of supply convoy protection in the affected sectors. Then we accelerate the repositioning. We cannot accelerate without pulling resources from other sectors, which creates new gaps. The room was quiet for a moment. How long were human vessels operating in Sector 9 before the resolution? Someone asked. I checked the records. 53 years. Another silence. And in Sector 12? 41 years. And in the Vela Corridor? I looked at the display. The Vela Corridor was not a sector. It was a navigational channel, a precise series of waypoints through a particularly difficult region of compressed space, where gravitational interference made standard navigation dangerous. 12 trade lanes ran through it. Combined, those lanes handled approximately a third of all cargo movement between the inner council worlds and the outer settlements. I will look into the Vela Corridor separately, I said, and moved the conversation forward. I looked into it that night, alone in my office, with the building quiet around me, and the city lights blinking slowly outside my window. The Vela Corridor had been navigated safely for 60 years because of a continuously updated navigational dataset that corrected for the gravitational drift in the region. The drift was not constant. It shifted over time, and without current data, the waypoint markers became unreliable, then dangerous, then impossible. The dataset had been maintained and shared freely by the Human Navigational Survey Corps as part of their standard operations. No one else had maintained it. No one else had been asked to. The last update was dated 59 days ago. The day before the Meridian cleared the outer Keth waypoint, and the last human ship left Council space, I sat at my desk for a long time after reading that. I thought about the vote, about the 11 hands, about the lightness I felt when Asha Reyes walked out of that chamber, about the way the Velhari representative had leaned over to congratulate me. Then I opened a new communication channel, entered the last known forwarding address for the Terran Diplomatic Corps, and composed a message. I kept it brief and professional. I explained the navigational situation. I asked if there was any possibility of continued data sharing on a technical basis, separate from the political resolution, as a practical matter of trade lane safety. I marked it urgent and sent it. The message bounced back in 6 minutes. No forwarding address on file. I stared at the notification on my screen for a long time. They had not left forwarding instructions, not for my office, not, as I would later discover, for any council office, not for the Velhari Trade Bureau, not for the Torvan Logistics Coordination Center, not for the medical supply chains that ran through Sector 4, not for anyone. They had packed up, filed their paperwork, cleared the waypoint, and disappeared into a part of space that was not ours. 14,000 ships, gone in 60 days, as if they had been waiting for the excuse. I closed the communication window and pulled up the resolution text again. I read it through slowly, all 14 paragraphs. I had written most of it myself. I knew every word. I was trying to find the line where we had gone wrong. I could not find it. That was the worst part. Every word was reasonable. Every concern was legitimate. Every complaint about human behavior had been real and documented and discussed at length. The bluntness, the speed, the size of their fleets, the way they made older species feel small, without ever quite doing anything you could formally object to. It had all seemed so reasonable. I turned off the office lights and went home. My building was quiet. My neighborhood was quiet. The whole city was quiet, the way cities always are in the hours before something changes, and you do not yet know it has changed. Somewhere out beyond the last waypoint in Sector 9, in the dark between stars that did not belong to us, 14,000 ships were doing whatever humans did when no one was watching. I did not sleep well that night. I would not sleep well for a long time. The Vela corridor closed to traffic 11 days after I sent that message. Not all at once. It was not dramatic, not at first. A cargo hauler reported navigational drift inconsistencies at waypoint 7. A passenger liner filed a hazard notice after a near miss with an unmarked gravitational eddy at waypoint 12. Then 3 ships in a single week reported instrument failures in the central corridor stretch. The kind of failures that happen when the guidance data your instruments are calibrated against no longer matches the actual physical environment you are moving through. The Council Transport Authority issued a temporary caution advisory. Within 10 days, the caution advisory became a full transit restriction. The Vela corridor was closed to all traffic, pending updated navigational surveys. No one had updated navigational survey equipment capable of mapping a gravitational drift corridor of that complexity. The Human Survey Corps had the equipment. They also had 60 years of baseline data that made the process fast and accurate. Without the baseline, starting a new survey from nothing would take 18 months minimum, assuming we could source the required instruments, which we could not, because the instruments had been manufactured by a human technology firm that had relocated outside council jurisdiction when the withdrawal began. 12 trade lanes shut down. A third of all cargo movement between inner and outer council space redirected to longer, more expensive routes that quickly became congested. I remember the morning the Transport Authority delivered that report to my office. I was eating breakfast at my desk, which I do not normally do, but I had been sleeping poorly and arriving early to get ahead of the growing pile of crisis files that had begun accumulating faster than I could clear them. The Deputy Transport Minister, a careful Velhari woman named Soth Prel, came in person rather than sending a courier. That alone told me before she opened her mouth that the news was significant. She laid the report on my desk. 12 pages. Very clean, very precise, very Velhari in its formatting. I read the first page while she stood there. "How long?" I asked. 18 months for a new survey, she said, possibly 24. We are looking at alternative instrument procurement options, but the options are limited. And the trade impact? She hesitated. The initial modeling suggests significant disruption to food supply chains in the outer settlements, particularly Myreth Station, and the 3 colony clusters in the Vela system itself. She paused. They relied heavily on corridor routing for perishable goods. I set the report down. I looked at the map on my wall. The Vela system. I knew it well. I had visited twice, years ago, when the Vela colonies had applied for council membership. 60,000 people, spread across 3 colony clusters, mostly families. Farmers and engineers and teachers and the children of farmers and engineers and teachers, building something in a distant part of the galaxy with the same patient determination that made humans so difficult to deal with in council chambers. They had voted for council membership overwhelmingly. They had been proud of it. I wondered if any of them had voted to stay when the Terran Compact had, presumably, made the call to leave. Issue emergency rerouting guidance to all affected supply chains, I said, and flag the Myreth Station situation for priority review. I want medical supply continuity confirmed before anything else. Sothprel left with the efficient speed of someone who had more bad news to deliver to other offices. I pulled Myreth Station's logistics file. Myreth Station was not a colony. It was a transit hub, a deep space installation built at the intersection of 4 major shipping routes, with a permanent population of about 22,000 and a daily transient population of several thousand more. It was also one of the primary distribution points for medical supplies across an 8-sector region. The station had a medical director named Owen Croft. I did not know him personally, but his name was on the quarterly health reports that crossed my desk as part of the standard council administrative review. He ran a tight operation. The reports were always orderly, always complete, always filed on time. 3 weeks after the Vela corridor closed, Owen Croft sent an emergency communication directly to my office, bypassing the normal reporting channels. The subject line was, "Outbreak. Please respond." I opened it immediately. The message was not long. There was a respiratory illness spreading through the station population. It had appeared suddenly, in 4 separate areas of the station at the same time, which suggested the source was environmental, rather than person-to-person contact. The station medical team had been unable to identify the pathogen through their standard diagnostic protocols. It did not match anything in their database. 53 people were symptomatic. 3 were in serious condition. He needed outside diagnostic support, and he needed it immediately. I forwarded the message to the Council Medical Coordination Bureau and marked it urgent. The Bureau's response came back in 2 hours. They could dispatch a diagnostic team, but the earliest available team was 12 days out. They recommended the station medical team submit samples through the standard pathogen submission protocol and await database analysis. 12 days. I looked at that number for a moment. Then I picked up my communication device and called the Bureau director directly. 12 days is not acceptable, I said. 53 people are symptomatic, and we do not know what we are dealing with. What is the fastest possible response time? The director, a soft-spoken Torvon named Kelveth, explained patiently that the Bureau had 2 diagnostic teams currently deployed, one at a colony in Sector 3, and one responding to a chemical incident in the outer Velhari territories. A 3rd team was being assembled from reserve personnel but had not yet completed their certification review. 12 days was genuinely the fastest available option given current resources. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat very still and tried to think. There was something in the back of my mind, something I had noticed in the human embassy records, the regular administrative reports that all delegations were required to submit to the council archive system. I had not read them carefully. No one had read them carefully. They were administrative records. They were meant to be filed, not studied. I pulled up the archive access terminal. I searched for Myreth Station in the Human Embassy Submission Database. 17 results came back. The most recent was dated 14 months ago. A quarterly operational summary, submitted by someone named Lieutenant Commander Patricia Holt of the Human Expeditionary Medical Corps. I opened it. It was 40 pages long. I read the first 10 pages in one sitting, then stopped. The Human Expeditionary Medical Corps had been maintaining a continuous disease surveillance network across an 11-sector region centered on Myreth Station, not because anyone asked them to, not because it was part of any council agreement or mutual defense arrangement, because, as the report explained in its opening paragraph with the same plain directness that had always made human diplomatic communication so aggravating to read. They believed early detection of cross-species pathogen transmission events was a necessary precondition for regional health stability. The network monitored atmospheric samples from 43 stations and transit hubs. It cross-referenced against a pathogen database that was updated weekly. It maintained emergency response protocols for 19 different outbreak scenarios. There was a section near the end of the report titled, "Identified Gaps and Ongoing Concerns." I read it with a feeling I could not quite name. Not exactly dread, something slower than dread. Something more like the moment you realized the thing you were afraid of already happened while you were busy reassuring yourself it would not. The section listed 3 pathogens of concern, identified in atmospheric sampling across the Myrith region over the preceding 12 months. All 3 were variants of previously catalogued organisms. All 3 were being monitored. None had triggered outbreak conditions. The third one on the list had a note attached to it. The note said that the monitoring frequency had been increased due to unusual mutation patterns observed in the most recent sample cycle, and that the human medical team had flagged it for elevated watch status pending further analysis. The date of that note was 11 months ago. I went back to Owen Croft's message. I read the description of the illness again, the respiratory symptoms, the sudden appearance in 4 separate areas simultaneously, the pathogen that did not match anything in the station's database. I sent a message to the human embassy forwarding address, knowing it would bounce, asking if there was any way to access the Expeditionary Medical Corps pathogen surveillance records for the Myrith region. It bounced in 4 minutes. I approved the 12-day diagnostic team dispatch and sent Owen Croft a personal message telling him help was on the way. I told him to isolate the symptomatic population and restrict atmospheric circulation in the affected areas, the standard advice that any medical protocol would recommend, the advice that is meaningful when you know what you are dealing with, and significantly less meaningful when you do not. By the time the diagnostic team arrived, the outbreak had spread to 211 people. 7 were in critical condition, 4 had not survived. The pathogen, once identified, turned out to be a variant of the 3rd organism on the Expeditionary Medical Corps watch list, the one with the unusual mutation patterns, the one they had flagged for elevated monitoring 11 months ago, and then presumably had been watching closely right up until the day they left. The treatment protocol, once developed, worked. The outbreak was controlled. The final death toll was 9, which is 9 more than it would have been if the people who knew what was coming had still been in a position to do something about it. I put that number in a file on my desk and tried not to look at it too often. I was not succeeding. I called another closed staff session. More people this time, because more things had gone wrong, and wrong things have a way of requiring more people to discuss them the longer they go on. Prith Vale from the Velhari delegation was there. Councillor Darrow, the Bureau Director, the Transport Authority Deputy, 3 senior analysts from the Council Intelligence Office, who had been requested by Councillor Darrow for reasons that had not yet been fully explained to me. I presented the situation clearly. Patrol coverage gaps in 8 sectors, Vela corridor closure and its downstream effects on supply chains, the Myrith station outbreak and its connection to the discontinued human medical surveillance network. I watched the faces around the table as I laid it out. I had expected some defensiveness, some attempt to reframe the situation as manageable, some instinct to protect the decision we had all made together, because when something goes wrong, it is human, or perhaps universal, to want to believe that the wrong thing was not your fault. What I saw instead was something I recognized from the early days of any major crisis. That moment, when the people in the room understand simultaneously that the scale of the problem is larger than what was being discussed in the corridor 10 minutes ago. "How many of these situations are we dealing with?" Prith Vale asked. She asked it quietly, which was not her style. She was a loud woman. The quiet frightened me more than anything else that had happened in that room. "I do not have a full accounting yet," I admitted. "These are the 3 I am confident about. I believe there are more." "How many more?" I looked at the 3 analysts from the Council Intelligence Office. They had not spoken yet. Their file was still closed on the table in front of them. "Councillor Darrow requested an analysis," I said. "Perhaps now is the time." The senior analyst, a young Torvan woman named Vel Soth who moved through the world with the kind of stillness, That often means someone is thinking faster than they are speaking. Opened her file. The Intelligence Office has been tracking human operational footprint data for the past decade as part of standard member species assessment, she said. We have compiled a list of services, functions, and activities performed by human entities within Council space during the period prior to their withdrawal. She put a page in front of each of us. The page had a list on it. The list had 47 items. I read the first 10. I forced myself to read slowly, to actually process each item, instead of letting my eyes slide past the words. Item 1. Navigational data maintenance for the Vela corridor and 3 secondary corridors. Item 2. Continuous pathogen surveillance across 11 sectors, centered on 6 major transit hubs. Item 3. Border Patrol coverage for sectors 9, 12, 14, 15, 17, and the Keth exclusion zone. Item 4. Debris field monitoring and clearance coordination for the Outer Rim shipping lanes. Item 5. Emergency search and rescue response coverage for sectors 7 through 21. I stopped reading. I looked up at Velsoth. Item 5, I said. Emergency search and rescue. Yes. Who is currently providing that coverage? She did not answer immediately. She did not need to. The answer was already visible in the specific quality of silence that had settled over the room. We are working on arrangements, Counselor Darrow said, carefully. There was a ship reported missing in Sector 11, 4 days ago, I said. A passenger vessel, crew of 12. I was told search and rescue assets were being coordinated. Yes, that coordination is ongoing. Ongoing, I repeated. It is a large sector. I looked back at the list. I made myself keep reading. Item 6. Maintenance and updating of the shared emergency frequency network used by all Council member species for interstellar distress communication. The emergency frequency network. The network that every ship in Council space used to broadcast distress signals. The network that search and rescue teams, patrol vessels, and medical response units all monitored. The network that had been installed, expanded, and maintained by human communication engineers over a period of 40 years, because it ran on a specific type of repeater technology that humans had developed and that no other species had invested in learning to maintain, because there had never been a reason to. I closed the page and placed it face down on the table. I did not trust myself to read any further in front of the others. We need a full impact assessment, I said. My voice was steady. I was grateful for that, because I was not sure anything else about me was. Every item on this list, current coverage status, gap severity, estimated time to replacement, or alternative arrangement, I want it on my desk in 7 days. The room nodded and moved. People gathered their files and began speaking in urgent low voices to each other as they stood to leave. Prith Vale passed my chair. She stopped beside me for a moment. She did not say anything. She looked at the face-down page on the table, then at me, then walked out. I turned the page back over after she left. I read the rest of the list alone. It took me a long time, not because it was long. It was 47 items. 47 specific, documented, operational functions. Each one something humanity had been doing, quietly, without ceremony, in the spaces between all the loud and official business of galactic governance. Item 29 stopped me. It read, Continuous monitoring of the Vreth exclusion zone, outer boundary markers, and deep-range sensor arrays. I did not know what the Vreth were. I had heard the name. It appeared in very old council records, in the category of historical curiosities. A pre-spaceflight civilization in the deep outer sectors, assessed by early exploration surveys as developing slowly and unlikely to achieve interstellar travel within any strategically relevant time frame. The exclusion zone had been established as a standard precaution. No council vessels entered it. No one monitored it, as far as any current staff member was aware. Except, apparently, humans had been monitoring it. I found the associated human survey records in the archive. There were hundreds of them. Systematic. I opened the most recent one, dated 8 months ago. I read it. Then I read it again. Then I closed everything on my desk and sat in my chair in the dark for a long time, staring at the city lights outside my window. Prithvale had said this was a transitional disruption. She was wrong. I had been wrong. We had all been wrong, together, in the most expensive possible way. The missing passenger ship in Sector 11 was found 17 days later. The crew had survived on emergency rations. They were recovered alive, all 12 of them, shaken and thin, but alive. I noted that in the file with the 9 names from Mirith Station. I kept both files close. I was going to need them. The abandoned embassy sat at the end of a wide, empty avenue on the administrative level of the Council Central District. It had been empty for 8 months, but it did not look empty from the outside. The humans had not stripped it. They had not removed the external lighting, or the small garden that ran along the front wall, or the flag that hung above the entrance, now faded slightly by 8 months of exposure to the environmental cycle that mimicked outdoor conditions in this part of the station. The flag was gray with a single pale circle in the center. Not the Earth flag, not the Terran Compact seal, just a simple gray field and a white circle. I had never thought to ask what it meant. I had the building access codes because all embassy buildings in the council district are administratively under my jurisdiction. I had never needed to use them before. Embassies are occupied by their respective delegations. That is how it works. You do not use the access codes because you do not need to, because there are people inside with keys. I used them on a Tuesday morning, 11 months after the withdrawal, alone, without telling anyone where I was going. The interior was clean. That surprised me, although it should not have. The halls were tidy, the air circulators were running, the environmental systems were functioning normally. The humans had left the building in good operational order. They had not abandoned it in anger. They had checked out of it the way you check out of a place you have been careful with, because you were raised to be careful with things, even things that were not yours to keep. I walked through the public reception areas first. The furniture was gone, but the fittings remained. The communication consoles were dark but intact. In the main reception hall there were marks on the wall, where framed items had hung, slightly lighter patches in the material, where the images had blocked the subtle environmental discoloration that buildings accumulate over years of use. Someone had hung a lot of things on those walls, and someone had taken them all down, carefully, every single one. I found the administrative wing, and the server room behind it. The servers were running. I had known they would be, because the power draw on this building had continued uninterrupted through the 8 months of vacancy, and I had noted it in the building management reports without investigating the reason. Server cores require power to maintain their data integrity. The humans had not disconnected them. I connected my access terminal to the primary server interface. The login prompt appeared. I tried the standard council administrative override. It did not work. I tried the emergency access protocol from the Council Building Management Authority. It did not work either. I was about to admit defeat and leave when I noticed a small physical note attached to the side of the primary console. A paper note, written by hand in a clean, precise script. Humans still used physical notes sometimes. I had always found it charming in a slightly puzzling way. The note said, "If you are reading this, things have probably gotten complicated. Access code for the archive. Open." The access code was the word open. I typed it in. The system accepted it immediately. I sat down in the chair in front of the console. The archive index loaded onto the screen. It was enormous. Decades of records, filed and cross-referenced with a thoroughness that I recognized, having seen the same quality of organization in every human administrative submission I had ever processed. I started with the most recently accessed files. I did not have a specific plan. I was looking for the shape of what I did not know, which is a disorganized way to search but sometimes the only honest approach. The most recently modified folder was labeled Handover. I opened it. It contained 42 documents. Each one was a detailed brief on a specific operational function that the human delegation and its associated support organizations had been performing within council space. Each brief described the function, its history, its current operational status, and its strategic importance. Each one ended with a section titled, "What happens if this is discontinued?" and a timeline of likely consequences organized by severity. I opened the navigational survey brief first. The What Happens section had 3 bullet points. The first said, the Vela corridor would become unsafe within 60 to 90 days without updated drift correction data. The second said recertification of alternative navigation systems would take 18 to 24 months. The third said the food supply impact on the Vela outer settlements would become acute within 6 months. The Vela corridor had closed on day 71. Food supply disruption to the outer settlements had been formally flagged by the Logistics Coordination Office on day 140. The document was accurate to within a few weeks. I opened the pathogen surveillance brief. The what happens section was longer, because the variables were more complex. But it described, in general terms, a situation that resembled Mirith Station in its essential features, and it noted that the probability of a significant outbreak event within the surveyed region, within 12 to 18 months of discontinued monitoring was, and this is the word the document used, high. Mirith Station had reached crisis level on day 93. I sat in that room and read for 6 hours. I did not stop for water. I did not stop when my back began to ache from the chair. I read the way you read, when you understand that what is in front of you matters more than your discomfort, more than your schedule, more than the several meetings that I was, by this point, certainly missing, and that someone in my outer office was probably trying to reach me about. The handover folder was not the only thing in the archive. There were decades of operational records behind it. Survey reports, medical monitoring logs, patrol incident summaries, diplomatic communication archives, internal embassy communications between human staff members. I read selectively, following threads that the handover documents suggested were important. I found a subfolder labeled Observed Risk Factors Long Term. It was organized by category: environmental, medical, political, strategic. The strategic subfolder had 23 entries, spanning 40 years. I read them in order, oldest to newest. The oldest entry was dated 41 years ago. It described, in the dry, factual language of an operational assessment, a situation in the outer deep sectors that the author described as requiring continued monitoring. The author was someone named Captain George Allen, assigned to the Human Outer Survey Corps. He described what his survey team had observed in the Vreth exclusion zone in careful, precise language that communicated without sensationalism that the civilization in question was not pre-spaceflight, had not been pre-spaceflight for some time, and showed behavioral indicators consistent with a species in the process of deciding whether to engage with its neighbors or eliminate them. The recommendation at the end of the document was, maintain monitoring, do not disclose to Council pending further analysis, assess annually. The entry from 35 years ago said, behavioral indicators unchanged, assessment maintained. The entry from 30 years ago said, minor territorial expansion observed within the exclusion zone. No outward movement. Assessment maintained with increased monitoring frequency. The entry from 20 years ago said, significant internal development observed. Evidence of advanced propulsion testing. Recommend upgrading assessment to elevated monitoring. Current patrol coverage adequate to detect any outward movement with sufficient advance warning for response coordination. The entry from 10 years ago said, continued development. 3 outward probe incidents in the past decade, all turned back by patrol response before reaching Council territory. Assessment unchanged. Note, current patrol coverage levels are the minimum required to maintain adequate early warning. Any reduction in human patrol presence in the outer sectors would create response time gaps. The most recent entry was dated 8 months ago, 1 week before the withdrawal. The author was Commander Asha Reyes. It said, the Council has voted to remove human patrol jurisdiction from the outer sectors. The Vreth monitoring program will end with the withdrawal. Based on current development indicators and behavioral patterns, the probability of outward incursion within 2 years of reduced monitoring is assessed as significant. This assessment has been shared with the Council Intelligence Office on 6 separate occasions over the past 5 years. No action was taken. We tried. I read those 2 words 4 times. They were the last words in the document. There was nothing after them. No recommendation, no further analysis, no polite diplomatic hedging. Just that. We tried. I sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling of the server room and thought about the 41 years of documents I had just read. 41 years of assessments, dutifully filed, shared with the Council Intelligence Office 6 times, and apparently acted upon not at all. I thought about the Intelligence Office's own files on the Vreth. I had checked them the previous month, after I first found the monitoring reference on item 29 of Velsoth's list. The Council intelligence files described the Vreth as a pre-spaceflight civilization of no current strategic relevance. They referenced 4 survey reports as their basis. All 4 were from human sources. All 4 were from 30 years ago or earlier. No one had updated the Council assessment. No one had bothered, because the humans were updating their own assessment, and presumably, if there was something important to know, they would say something. They would raise it in a council session, or send a formal communication, or do whatever it was you were supposed to do when you knew something that other people needed to hear. They had raised it in the Council Intelligence Office 6 times. No action was taken. I closed the archive terminal. I replaced the physical note on the side of the console carefully, exactly as I had found it. I turned off the room light and walked back through the empty corridors of the embassy and out through the front door, past the faded flag and the small garden that was still being watered by an automated system that had been running, quietly and faithfully, for 8 months, with no one inside to benefit from it. I walked back to my office. I did not take the transit. I walked, because I needed the time. The city was normal around me. Velhari transit vehicles humming along their designated corridors, Torvon merchants arranging their window displays, a group of young students from the exchange program moving in a loose cluster, talking over each other, pointing at things on their devices, completely unaware that 37 light-years away, in the deep outer sectors, the thing that 41 years of human monitoring had been quietly holding at bay, had been watching us for a long time, and had not yet decided whether to continue watching or to move. I arrived at my office and sat at my desk. I pulled up the Council intelligence file on the Vreth, the one that said, pre-spaceflight, no current strategic relevance. I opened a new document underneath it. I began writing a briefing request. The language I used was extremely careful, because I was asking the Council to reconsider an assessment that had been current and unchallenged for 30 years, based on information contained in the archive of a delegation we had just voted to remove from our community. And I needed the language to be calm and precise and completely free of anything that sounded like panic, because the moment it sounded like panic, people would stop reading the content and start managing the reaction. I wrote for 2 hours. I filed the briefing request under emergency review. I did not sleep that night either. I had stopped expecting to. The morning I am describing to you now was dark in the way that mornings on Council Station are sometimes dark, when the external lighting cycle runs slightly early, and you look out your window expecting the gradual warm rise that signals the start of the administrative day, and find instead a flat gray that makes the whole station feel like it is suspended underwater. I was at my desk before the cycle corrected. I had been there since the previous cycle, though I had gone home for a few hours in between, mostly to change my clothes and look at my apartment with the faint surprise I always feel when I return to a private space and remember that I have one. The emergency briefing on the Vreth had not been well received. That is the polite formulation. The accurate formulation is that the Council Senior Committee had looked at the intelligence summary I provided, cross-referenced it with their existing assessment files, listened to Velsoth from the Intelligence Office explain with admirable restraint that the human monitoring data was credible and the behavioral indicators were of serious concern, and then spent 40 minutes discussing whether the human assessment could be trusted, given that it came from a delegation that had recently left Council jurisdiction under contentious circumstances. The implication was not stated directly, but it hung in the room like something heavy and slightly rotten. Maybe the humans had exaggerated the threat. Maybe they had an interest in making the Council nervous. Maybe the monitoring records were inflated to make the case that human patrol presence was more necessary than it actually was. I had pushed back on this as firmly as the context permitted. Velsoth had pushed back more firmly, with the specific numbers from the survey records laid out in a format that was very difficult to argue with, if you were being honest about what you were seeing. The committee had agreed to commission a new independent assessment by Council Intelligence Assets. The new assessment would be completed in approximately 8 months, using survey equipment that would need to be sourced, which would take an additional 4 to 6 months, meaning the first independent data on the Vreth situation would reach us in roughly a year. The committee had also agreed, as a precautionary measure, to begin planning for potential enhanced patrol deployment in the outer sectors. The planning process would take 6 to 9 months. Actual deployment would depend on available assets and budgetary review. I had walked out of that meeting with the specific kind of controlled calm that sits just above the level where you start saying things you cannot take back. That had been 6 weeks ago. Since then, 3 things had happened. The first was that the missing passenger ship from Sector 11 had been recovered, and in the process, it became publicly known that the sector had no search and rescue coverage, which produced the kind of public and media attention that the Council had been managing carefully for weeks, and suddenly could not manage at all. The story spread quickly. Other coverage gaps began to surface. The Mirith station outbreak was already public knowledge, but its connection to the discontinued medical monitoring had not been clearly established in the public record, until a journalist from the Velhari Free Press connected the timeline and published the account. The Council Communications Office issued statements. The statements were accurate as far as they went, which was not very far. There were questions about what else the Council did not know that humans had been quietly doing. The Communications Office did not have good answers. The second thing that happened was that Owen Croft, the medical director at Mirith Station, gave an interview. He spoke carefully and without anger, which made everything he said harder to dismiss than if he had been furious. He described the 9 people who died. He described the abandoned surveillance network he had discovered in the human archive records. He described sending a message to my office asking for help and waiting 12 days for a diagnostic team. He did not blame anyone by name. He simply described what had happened, in order, with the precision of a man who had been recording details his whole professional life, and was not about to stop now. The interview was widely distributed. The third thing that happened was that I received a communication from the Terran Compact. Not bounced back, not undeliverable. A real communication, with a real point of origin, and a real name on the sender field. The name was Commander Asha Reyes. The message was 6 sentences long. It said, Arbiter Veth Soral. We are aware of the Mirith situation and the current patrol coverage status. We have also been monitoring the outer sector indicators that we flagged in our withdrawal briefings. We are not currently in a position to re-enter Council jurisdiction, but we are watching closely. If the outer sector situation develops to the point that you believe an emergency response consultation would be appropriate, you can reach us at this address. We hope it does not come to that. I read it 6 times. I drafted a reply immediately and did not send it immediately. I sat with it for 2 hours, editing it, because I wanted it to be correct in ways that went beyond just the factual content, and getting it correct was genuinely difficult. I was trying to write something that acknowledged what we had done, without being so weighted with acknowledgement, that it became about my feelings rather than the situation. I was trying to ask for information without it reading as a request to fix our problems, because we had voted them out of our community, and asking them to fix our problems was something I did not have the right to do casually. I was trying to convey the urgency without manufacturing it, because the urgency was real, and I did not need to manufacture it. But sometimes when you have been wrong about something large, the impulse to make it seem even larger than it is takes over, as a form of penance, and I did not want that either. I sent the message on a Thursday afternoon. She replied the same day. We exchanged 4 messages over the following week. Technical, precise, professional. She answered my questions about the Vreth monitoring data directly and completely. She did not editorialize. She did not reference the vote or the resolution or the withdrawal. She treated the exchange exactly as what it was, 2 people who needed to share information about an important situation, doing so as efficiently as possible. On Friday of that week, she sent me a file attachment with the most recent human monitoring data on the outer sectors, including the Vreth exclusion zone boundaries and the sensor array readings from the past 8 months. I opened the file and had the same reaction I had in the embassy server room, a long period of sitting very still, while my mind processed what I was looking at. The outer boundary of the Vreth exclusion zone had shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that screamed crisis, but it had shifted in 3 places, in a pattern that the accompanying analysis described as consistent with systematic probe activity, the kind of careful, incremental boundary testing that a species performs when it is assessing a neighbor's response capacity and finding the neighbor somewhat less responsive than before. I forwarded the data to Velsoth. She responded within an hour. Her message said, "This is consistent with our updated modeling, and significantly worse than the committee's baseline assessment." I replied, "Please prepare an emergency committee briefing, tomorrow." Then I wrote another message to Asha Reyes. This one was harder to write than the others. It was not a request for information. It was something closer to an admission, and I spent most of the evening finding the right words for it. I wrote, Commander Reyes, the data you sent has been reviewed by our intelligence office and confirms the elevated concern status you and your team documented over the past several years. I want to acknowledge directly, and on the record, that the Council received your assessments through proper channels and did not act on them. I do not have a good explanation for that, and I am not going to offer one. What I am going to ask is whether there is any form of coordination arrangement that the Terran Compact would consider in the current circumstances, understanding that we are not in a position to offer restoration of Council membership or prior status, and that I would not insult you by framing this as anything other than asking for help. I sent it. I did not edit it to be more diplomatic. It was already more diplomatic than it needed to be. Her reply came the next morning. It said, "We will need to discuss this internally. Give us 2 weeks." 2 weeks. We had 2 weeks. The committee meeting went poorly in the sense that the information was bad, and well in the sense that everyone in the room finally stopped arguing about whether to take the information seriously. Velsoth was precise and firm. The monitoring data was clear. The boundary shift was documented. The behavioral pattern was recognizable to anyone who read the 41 years of human survey records that were now freely available in the embassy archive under the password OPEN. Prith Vale was very quiet throughout. I noticed that she did not argue with any of it. After the meeting, she fell into step beside me in the corridor. "How long have they known?" she asked. "About the Vreth?" "About all of it." I thought about George Allen's report from 41 years ago. About the quarterly assessments. About the handover folder with its 42 documents and its careful timelines of exactly what would break and exactly when. "Long enough to document it thoroughly," I said. She walked beside me for a few more steps. "They left us the archive," she said. "Yes. They left it unlocked. The password was open." She was quiet for a moment. "They wanted us to find it," she said. "I think so," I said. "I think they wanted us to understand what we were choosing. I think they hoped we would choose differently, and when we did not, they left us the information anyway, because they are the kind of people who leave information behind, even for someone who just voted to remove them from the community." Prith Vale did not respond to that. She turned at the next corridor junction and walked away without saying anything else. I went back to my office. I sat at my desk and waited for 2 weeks to pass. It was the longest 2 weeks of my career. The reply came on a Wednesday. 14 days, as she had said. Not 13, not 15. Asha Reyes did what she said she would do in the time she said she would do it, which I noted without surprise, because every interaction I had ever had with her suggested this was simply how she operated. The message was longer than her previous ones. She said the Terran Compact had held internal deliberations on the question of coordination. She said the deliberations had been, in her word, significant, which I understood to mean difficult, which I further understood to mean that not everyone in the Compact agreed that helping was the right decision, given everything that had preceded the request. She said the Compact would not re-enter Council jurisdiction as a member species, or under any arrangement that resembled the previous relationship. She said the Compact would not accept restored voting rights, patrol jurisdiction assignments, or any formal role within Council governance structures. She said the Compact would consider a limited arrangement under which Terran vessels would provide emergency response assistance in the outer sectors on a strictly independent basis, as a separate polity acting in the interests of regional stability and the protection of civilian populations, with no obligation to accept direction from Council authority and full discretion to disengage at any time. She said there were 2 conditions. The first condition was a formal Council acknowledgement, on the public record, that the withdrawal had not been the result of human misconduct, but had been caused by the resolution removing human rights and protections, and that the resolution was being reviewed. The second condition was a corridor of space to be designated as a civilian humanitarian buffer zone, so that the populations displaced by any Vreth activity in the outer sectors would have a guaranteed safe destination and legal passage rights through Council territory to reach it. The buffer zone was not for humans. The humans were not being displaced. The buffer zone was for every other species in the outer sectors who had no particular part in the resolution, or the vote, or the politics of the galactic community, and who would bear the consequences of the situation regardless. She asked for a response within 1 week. I took the message to a full council session that afternoon. The session was long. There were arguments. Some of the older language from the resolution debates surfaced again. The concerns about cultural destabilization and proportional response, and human fleets operating in spaces that were not officially theirs. I listened to all of it. I waited until the room had exhausted itself. Then I said, "There are 9 names in a file on my desk. They are the people who died in Mireth Station because we discontinued medical surveillance for the region. There is also a list of ships that were raided in the Keth border sectors in the first 4 months after the withdrawal, and the number of crew members who were harmed in those raids. There is a report on the Vela corridor closure and its food supply impact, which is ongoing and affecting 60,000 people in the outer settlements. And there is a 41-year archive of Vreth monitoring data in the human embassy on this station, accessible to anyone with the password open, that describes in detail a threat we chose not to know about, because someone else was handling it for us." I paused. "We are being asked to acknowledge what happened. We are being asked to designate a buffer zone for civilians who are not our citizens, because someone who we asked to leave is still thinking about people who are not their citizens either. These are not unreasonable conditions. They are, if anything, considerably more reasonable than this situation deserves." The vote passed. It was not 11-1. It was 12-0. I sent the reply to Asha Reyes the same day. Same evening, actually. I did not want to wait until morning. Her response came back in 7 minutes, and I noted the response time with a complicated feeling I still do not entirely have a name for. 7 minutes. They were 7 minutes away. They had been 7 minutes away this entire time. The response said, "Received. Terran compact vessels will begin positioning within 72 hours. Please transmit your current outer sector patrol status and known Vreth boundary positions to the following secure channel. 72 hours. Not 6 months of planning. Not a budget review. Not an asset assessment and a deployment committee. 72 hours. Because they had been ready. Because when you spend 41 years monitoring a situation, and you are the kind of organization that documents everything carefully and keeps everything maintained, and never quite stops watching, even after someone has told you in a formal vote, with 11 raised hands, that your watching is unwelcome, you do not need 6 months to prepare for the thing you have been quietly preparing for the whole time. I transmitted the requested information. I set up the secure channel. I briefed my staff and the Council Coordination Office and the Border Sector Administration on what was happening and what they should and should not say publicly about it. Then I went home. I changed my clothes. I ate something. The first real meal I had eaten at a proper table in approximately 4 days. I looked out the window of my apartment at the lights of the city. 3 days later, the first Terran compact patrol vessels crossed back into the outer sectors. They did not cross into Council jurisdiction formally. They operated in the adjacent space, the civilian buffer zone that the Council had formally designated, which technically abutted Council territory without being within it. The technical distinction mattered for the formal record and meant nothing whatsoever for what those vessels were actually doing, which was what they had always done: monitoring, watching, being present in the places where presence was needed before need became emergency. I watched the movement reports as the Terran compact fleet distributed through the outer sectors. The numbers were smaller than the old human presence. They had not come back in the same volume, but they were positioned with a precision that suggested intimate familiarity with every vulnerability in the region, every gap, every sector where a raider might probe, or a trade lane might buckle, or a pathogen might go undetected, for just long enough to become a crisis. 3 weeks after their arrival, Vreth probe activity at the outer boundary markers stopped. Not reduced, stopped. I noted that in my files. 4 weeks after their arrival, I received a communication from the Border Sector Administration in Sector 9, reporting that the Keth raiders had retreated from the region entirely. The sector administrator speculated that this might be related to increased patrol visibility in the adjacent buffer zone. I agreed with that assessment. 5 weeks after their arrival, a new navigational dataset was transmitted to the Council Transport Authority from a Terran compact survey vessel. The dataset covered the Vela corridor drift patterns. It was comprehensive, current, and accompanied by a technical note that said the data was being shared freely for the benefit of the civilian populations that relied on the affected trade lanes. It said nothing about the closed corridor, or the 18-month survey timeline, or the disruption to the outer settlements. It just shared the data, and let the data be what it was. The corridor reopened for traffic 30 days later, after the Transport Authority completed the necessary recertification process, using the new dataset. I watched each of these things happen from my desk, in the same office where I had sat on the day of the vote, feeling the chamber lighten when Asha Reyes walked out. I understood now what that feeling had been. It had not been relief. It had been the sensation of a load shifting, of weight redistributing in ways I could not see because I had never been paying attention to where it was being carried. 6 weeks after the Terran compact vessels arrived in the outer sectors, I requested a meeting with Asha Reyes. She agreed to meet in person, neutral location, not the council chamber, not the embassy. She suggested a small conference room in the transit hub district, the kind of anonymous space that could have been on any station in any system. I agreed to that immediately. She arrived before me. She was wearing the same gray uniform, still with no decorations. She was reading something on a small device. She looked up when I came in, and stood to greet me. She did not offer her hand, and I realized she was waiting to take my lead on the formality of the greeting, which was something a skilled diplomat does when they want to make sure the tone is set by the person who asked for the meeting. I had forgotten how good she was. I sat down across from her. She sat. A server brought water. Neither of us touched it. "I wanted to thank you," I said. She nodded once. The same nod. Always the same nod. "I also wanted to ask you something," I said. Directly, off the record. "All right. Did you know this was coming? All of it. When you walked out of that chamber, did you know what was going to happen?" She looked at me across the small table. The room was quiet. Somewhere in the transit hub outside, the normal sounds of galactic commerce and movement continued without us. "We had models," she said. "We knew what would break, and roughly when. We knew what was in the outer sectors, and what it was likely to do without regular monitoring." "Did you think we would call you back?" She was quiet for a moment. "We hoped," she said, "that things would not get bad enough to require it." She paused. "We prepared, in case they did. That is all we ever do. We see what might happen. We prepare. We hope we are wrong." She looked at the table for a moment and then back at me. "We are usually right." "The archive," I said. "You left it for us." "We left everything in order," she said. "That is what you do when you leave a place. You leave things in order for whoever comes after. The password." She looked at me for a moment, and I thought I saw something brief and complicated move through her expression, something that was not quite amusement, and not quite sadness, but contained something of both. "Someone should have opened it sooner," she said. I did not argue with that. She gathered her device and stood. I stood too. She looked at me with the same direct, quiet attention she had turned on every interaction I had ever witnessed from her, the kind of attention that was not hostile, but that left nowhere to hide from the clarity of being genuinely seen. "Arbiter Veth Soral," she said. "For what it is worth, none of us enjoyed being right about this." She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and turned back once. "The buffer zone will need to be expanded if the Vreth situation escalates further," she said. "I am sending you the projected coordinates. You should prepare the administrative designation in advance so it is ready if it is needed." Then she walked out. I stood in that small conference room in the transit hub district and listened to the sounds of the station around me and thought about 41 years of monitoring documents and a password that simply said, "Open," and a woman who had sat through an 11-to-1 vote in complete silence and walked out of a chamber that was not going to remember her correctly and done everything exactly right anyway. We called them destabilizing. We meant that they made us feel small. We were right about one of those things. I walked back to my office through the transit hub, through the ordinary busy motion of the galactic community going about its day, completely unaware of the 72-hour response time, and the 41 years of records, and the small gray flag on the empty embassy that was still hanging outside a building no one was currently living in. I thought about the projected coordinates she was sending me for the expanded buffer zone. I thought about the word she used. If. I thought, they are still hoping they are wrong. That, more than anything else I had witnessed in the past 2 years, was the thing I would carry with me for the rest of my career. Not the vote, not the list of 47 functions, not the 9 names or the closed corridor, or the probe activity at the outer markers. All of those things mattered. All of those things had costs that would be calculated and recorded and argued about for years. But the thing I would carry was this: the people who had been right about all of it, who had watched it coming for decades and documented every detail, and left the archive unlocked and replied in 7 minutes, and positioned their fleet in 72 hours, and made their one condition be a buffer zone for people who were not even theirs. Those people had still been hoping they were wrong. They had prepared anyway, but they hoped. There is something in that worth understanding. I went back to my office and opened the buffer zone administration file and began preparing the extended designation before I received the coordinates, before they were confirmed necessary, before anyone asked me to. I prepared. I hoped I was wrong. I was not. But I prepared anyway. It seemed, by then, like the very least I could do.
Alright, where you at, Tiny? Oh, there you are. When I'm out of town, I be tripping, I be on.
Hello, hello.
What's up?
Don't fucking sell me. I'm on my big now, bro. Just give me that shit and watch me work.
Bet.
Just pass me the ball, nigga, and let me score all 21 games. Promise you. Like that. Nah, you lose, bro. Nah, I'm sorry.
Oh, don't pass it yet. Don't pass it. Don't. Cut. I got Diamond on Legend. Hold on. Tiny.
My bad. I was putting my cellular device on the charger. Hit me. I'm banging this bitch. Matter of fact, I'm gonna put this shit on this nigga head.
Wait, my stream can't hear you. I just noticed.
I'm fucking ass.
You need to allow your voice, Tiny.
How I do that?
Alright, hold on.
Jump one more time. Good boy.
Yo,
Yeah.
I'm finna make a clan. Guess the clan. Oh, I didn't.
Yeah, silly goose. Oh, I didn't take it back.
Cut.
Oh my fucking. Oh shit.
It's fine.
Traveling.
It's gonna called Ski. It's gonna be called Ski. Me and you are the co-founders.
Great. Make me CEO that bitch.
Hey, you said what? Make you CEO?
Yeah, bro.
You the co-founders. Oh fuck! I caught that wrong. One more.
I'm the best big to ever play the fucking game. Again. I say. Peace.
Oh my. Oh. Can you shoot on that bit? On this build?
Let me stop trolling, bro. Let me get to a bucket. And yeah, I can shoot. I can shoot on every build.
Hey, I need to throw loud so I can get mascot. We need to throw loud so I can get mascot.
You mascot, I got you. Ooh, shit. Break.
Yeah, it's gonna throw you loud. Go, 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 go. $20-0, $20-0. All right, hey, back out. I'm gonna go. Actually, no, don't back out. I'm gonna go get my wire real quick. I'll be right back. Allow your voice.
How I do that?